Please welcome to the stage, or back up to the stage, for our panel discussion round, Securing an Inclusive Economy Through Supercomputing, Social Networking, and Industry-Led Ecosystem Frameworks. Carl Curtin will be serving as our moderator. Our panel members are Terrence Mills, Josh Fetcher, Swathi Young, Hillary Doe, and Sita Goff. Let's give them a warm round of applause. Thank you.
Can I have that? May I have that? Well, hello, everyone. And hello, panel.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello.
It was interesting listening to Josh, Terry, and
Hillary. Yep.
speak, because the construct of what it is that I believe and hope for that we can talk about really was germane to what you were saying. And so first I'll ask whether I need to kind of set up for everyone. Is there a notion, is there someone, raise your hand on the panel if you have an idea what we're talking about?
I'll talk about it.
Sort of, right. All right. So what we'd like to talk about today, and to the extent that we are being recorded, is to create an archive of a conversation that we can take to the people that have the dollars, and if we could think in terms of creating a federal lab for this, right? So the construct of the conversation, Hillary, that you were having relative to leadership, and how do we build leadership, and looking at how do we build leadership from a perspective that starts to look at the fact that homogeneous strategic thinking with homogeneous folks has been proven that if you bring a diverse group, you actually create a better solution. So if we were to look at these national security issues that we have in our country, things like diversity within, or the attacks that we're having in cybersecurity, if we'd have looked at these things from a defensive posture, then we would say in order to keep us safe, in order to build this nation, we're going to have to mitigate this homogeneous structure and create a more diverse structure. So I would just want to start with the postulate of leadership, and then the other part, Terrence, that you were speaking in terms of person-centric engagement. And so what we're looking at is how it is that we would use artificial intelligence on the federal level lab, like federal lab level, that we're talking now with Department of Energy about exascale. We're talking about their supercomputers. We're talking about how it is that we can, what would we need to do in order to need the kind of infrastructure that the federal government has? And so I looked at Plato. I looked at what you're about and what you're doing, and this conversation relative to the framework that you've created relative to how would you think about creating a more customer-centric process. And then if we took that process and said, how do we bring that to our education system? How do we create a person-centric education system with what you're doing? And then how would that make you a billionaire? Because you did that. And your brilliance relative to what you're talking about, the work that you're doing, would it be okay if that happened? So that's okay, right? So he gets $1 billion, right? So so let's start here, right? Josh, the fact that you were speaking and communicating about this white space mentality, right? Like you've got to start with this, I don't have the words, but they're beautiful words. What did you call writing and?
A blank canvas?
Well, I know the blank canvas. That's say it again?
Compounding skills, yeah. That's
Compounding skills,
right?
right?
In front.
So I happen also to be the chairman of the Virginia Career Education Foundation for the Commonwealth of Virginia. And so they're looking at career and technical education, right? So if we look at this conversation relative to reading, writing, and arithmetic, if we look at what we value right now, there is a whole movement on coding, as you know. But yet you're saying, as an individual who happens to be brilliant, you're saying, no, we need to actually think about something else. We need to think about looking at it a different way. We need to look at how it is that we can start building assets in what we're learning and knowing, and that writing or sales or music and these things that you're saying is something that if we actually hyper-focus on those things, we will actually be able to use that for a lifetime. But if we want to have this conversation relative to how we're going to get to the future of technology, and we start talking about coding, then we've lost before we started.
I had a quick thought about that. I love the word compounding skills. I liken it to like, writing, music, all those things are like going to the gym to work out your brain. Let's say, for instance, I'm an NFL football player. Does an NFL football player only get on the field and learn football day in, day out? No, they go run, they do intervals, they go to the gym, they lift weights. They do all of these other things to train every muscle of their body so that when it comes to being on the field, they have all the tools that they need to then execute those things that they need to do to run the play, to score the touchdown, whatever that is. And all the music and these compounding skills are the things that you do at the gym and on the outside of the game to make you better at the game. Do you still need to know the rules of the game? Yes. Do you still need to know how to run a play? Yes. So you need to know those other skills, but you have to have the backstory. And those best athletes, you could put them in any sport, and they're going to be successful at it because they have those compounding skills that they've built up, and their body and their mental, everything is ready for it.
Well, context is everything. And SETA?
SETA.
SETA.
Yep.
So we've had a chance to hear from Hillary. We've had a chance to hear from Josh and Terrence. Could you speak a little bit more about what you do and what you're short, but enough to give us context?
I'll keep it very short. I'm the managing director of Bunker Labs DC, where we help military veterans and their spouses start and grow businesses.
Thank you for serving those who serve.
Thank you.
Awesome. So, Swati?
Yes.
Yes. So, inside this conversation, first give me a little more context as well. Your background.
Sure. I'm the founder of Startup Dev Labs and TechNot Solutions, where I actually help anybody talking about the blank canvas, idea on a blank canvas, but how do you take it to market? And like you mentioned, it's not about the coding. It's understanding who your customers are, what are they thinking to make it successful. So I help them do that. And I also am the founder of DC Emerging Technologies.
Okay.
As a technologist, and I see this from non-technologists, everybody are a little apprehensive. Technology is coming too fast and furious for everybody to catch up. So what do? Do we learn coding or the new technologies, or do we use the compounded skills? I think there's no right answer. It's a mix of everything.
I'm sure it's all of the above.
Agreed.
And just so we could kind of play along, so I would like for you to be accountable, please be accountable and responsible for figuring out what those transactions would be if we actually do figure this out. Because he's got $1 billion, we got to figure out why he got that $1 billion, right? And if you look at his website and see this conversation about Plato, you'd see why. Because we've got to begin to start these frameworks. But then when we start looking at the military community and you start looking at their relationship to adjudicated guidelines, right? The fact that they've already had a level of vetting, and then you start looking at resilience within that group, right? So one of the things that we need to start looking at is reframing the entire conversation. And this is what happens when you go through boot camp. You go through an experience where your whole entire existence has been reframed. And so that's a muscle, right, that they already have. The challenge is inside of these kinds of conversations about thinking about where we're going to be, thinking about where we'll be 20 years from now, where we're going to be 15 years from now, is sometimes we need a completely different way of thinking, but we have those resources available. So I just want to kind of share that to say that those folks that you're helping to come into that business construct, what if we could create a conversation to where they're they're protecting and serving inside of this education context to make sure that the outcomes that the federal government is funding actually get protected, and we actually create a conversation where we've got 1,000 of your folks in a 1099 coming into a contract where they actually are responsible for making sure that the outcomes of what we create here actually get done. So, 1,000 times, $1,500 an hour, we'll bill at somewhere around $100 an hour. Figure out the math and you know how much you get. You figure out the cut on that, right? So, And Josh, I just want you to know that thank you for that feedback, but I was thinking more that your expertise, so part of the word was social networking framework, right? So you got that to really begin to understand that these applications that we have, right, can be used for good, can be used for other purposes. So when we start looking at our education system, I think about my school record, right? So I was in a PTAC meeting where they were deciding on whether or not it was going to be a hospital-centric system or a person-centric system for medical records. And the vote was person-centric. Yay, thank God, right? So if you start looking at person-centric conversation, right, what are you saying? And you start looking at this blank canvas conversation that you're having, and then you start looking at student, right, as a user, and that why can't I have all my public records, meaning how many files did I create, everything I did from the very beginning of time, and then have the artificial intelligence of that begin to then predict what I'm needing to be connected to inside of me as one user. In Virginia, we have 1.1 million students, right, at $12,000 per student. It's a $12 billion marketplace. How is it that we can create something that actually attacks that $12 billion marketplace by actually looking at having federal financing to start looking at how we build that system that creates that innovation and have Virginia be the pilot? So I'm just saying that to say that what you said was brilliant, sir. I don't even have you on the list, so could you?
I just turned up. I'm the Australian. I'm the random Australian that just turns up at conferences all over the place. So I thought there's a chair up here, and I'll just sit down and I'll have a chat about something. I don't know. I can talk about anything.
Have a chat.
I'll just have a chat. What are we going to talk about? It's all good. Okay, so I'm Anthony Murford. I'm the Minister Counsellor for Industry, Science and Education at the Australian Embassy. And so I've been brought in to have a, sort of from the Australian perspective, some of the things that we've been looking and tackling around, the intersection we're seeing between, the innovation, the education component, and where do we go in 5 to 10 years. And one of the big roles that I do have here in the US is providing advice to our decision makers and our government about, where do we want to be, what are some of the new innovative models we're doing, and how do we rethink where we're going as we develop things like our digital economy strategy, investing, quantum computing, supercomputing, etc.
Pivot on that for a little bit longer.
I'll pivot as long as you like me to, so it's all right, I can keep going.
One pivots and you stole a chair.
Yeah, that's right. You're not having it back.
Speak to that relative to data-driven decisions relative to education.
Well, that's a good curveball. So I think maybe I'll step back and I'll talk about with data-driven decisions. I think some of the things that we've been looking at in Australia is firstly opening up data access, so that one thing we're trying to do with many of our policies is have government as an exemplar and trying to step out of the way, but also provide the information and the data holds that we have, so that there are a lot of innovative companies out in the sector that can actually use some of the material that's there and work out some of these intractable problems. And if you turn it to education, I think we are at this a real big intersection about where do we go, what do we think about the future of work, and how do we bring our students forward. And then touching on the earlier one, particularly the gender equity issues that we really do need to address. Looking at data and trying to use the data, provide it, make it available so we can actually identify where the gaps are so that we can inform our education policies. And so some of the things that are starting to come out, and one of the examples I will use is that we've leveraged a US model called things like PTech, where we're trying to get that intersection between, we use grade 1 to 12, but in the latter years of high school, engaging with industry, engaging with education providers, so that we can be providing stronger pathways. And I think an important part as we go towards the future workforce, it is that engagement of the industry and working out what are the skills we need, which then touches back on the earlier stuff around, well, sometimes we actually don't even know the skills that are needed. Industry don't know, and that's why it comes back to those horizontal skills and how do we create those.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I'll say. Is that enough of a pivot for now?
That's good. That's
All
good.
right, okay.
And so inside of that construct, that I just wanted, and it's beautiful that you bring this international conversation as well, because I truly believe in the future of technology that we should be thinking about solving once, selling many times, right? So that we have this opportunity to create and envision a conversation where we build something, and then if we build it within an international construct, then we could kind of figure it. So Hillary, because I was giving Josh this social networking framework credit. You're like, wait a minute, I'm nation builder.
No.
So I just like to share, because again, I want to just tap onto this social networking framework conversation, but then look in this international conversation, but also start looking at this place where we pivot AI inside of social networking frameworks, so that we have this place where outcomes, right, can be redefined. So from a nation builder perspective, what say you?
Sure. Okay, so let me zoom out for 2 seconds and tell you.
Maybe you describe a little bit what
Yeah,
you're doing.
tell you a little bit about Nation Builder. So you have a sense of, from a data nerd perspective, you have a sense of what I'm working with when I talk about our data set. We have about 10,000 organizations that use the platform to lead. About 20% of our revenue comes from political campaigns, so there's a large cohort of candidates who are using the platform, a bunch of nonprofit organizations, some big companies, and whole political parties in some cases, so most of the political parties in the United Kingdom, a lot of political work in Australia actually, some in Canada. We had 3,000 candidates on the ballot in the US for the 2016 elections, for example. So what's powerful about that is the diversity of folks and the sheer number of people who are trying to all lead in their sectors with the same tool, because it holds constant some important things, so you can start to glean what is making folks successful, what's making folks different. And I guess the thing that I'd say is we've been able to, I guess I feel confident that we've gotten underneath a few commonalities in the folks that are successful irrespective of sector. And I feel like I heard some of this reflected in what y'all said, so I'm curious if you guys see this as well, or if it's different for your specific constituencies. But the three things that relate in part to AI are, one, what we call putting people at the center, but basically those leaders or parties or companies who recognize that it's about human connection, that it's not tech for tech's sake, but leveraging tech to scale real human interactions, real relational interactions, are folks that are really, really successful. So there's a lot of ways to do this with technology, things that we don't even think of, but a good proxy is to imagine doing the things that you do on social media in real life. So for example, the number of people who send blast emails to their entire list over and over again, even though no one ever answers them, in real life, if you approach someone every day and said basically the same thing to them and they never answered you, you would stop. Or you would do something else, or say something else, or send them a text, or you know what I mean? And so being able to think about how human you are in the ways that you're showing up with your people is really essential. Leveraging Liquid and email, thinking about how to segment and target, leveraging AI to have personalized interactions with folks, to know when someone comes in your store. Those kinds of things are examples of putting people at the center, as we call it. The next one is moving folks to action. There was this, I think, misunderstanding when we innovated around a lot of tech platforms about what the metrics were for success. So the idea was just measure the size of your email list or something. But having a passive email list is insufficient. Or the number of likes on a post that you report to your grant, your foundation. That doesn't make any sense. It's sort of a meaningless metric. So we talk about the folks who are able to move people to action. How successful are you at getting passive email recipients to be volunteers or donors or customers or whatever it is? And that can be obviously facilitated with lots of complex text, with serious data-driven decisions about what you ask people to do and when. One of the biggest mistakes we see nonprofits make is they'll ask people for money once a year. But the best time to ask someone who just gave you a small donation for another donation is a month later, 2 weeks later, immediately, basically. And you can figure that out if you have big data. And then the third thing is basically distributing leadership, which I mentioned earlier, but a recognition that you can't by yourself like hierarchically force people to hear you and listen to you and be engaged in your cause. You actually have to let other people be your advocates and be your face in the world and tell folks about you. So tech that figures out how to distribute those things to people is really powerful and not lose the data. How do you give people the ability to go out and be your advocate and also get data on everything they're doing?
So inside this, because I want to pivot and I want to get to Terrence after this. And we are in this conversation where something doesn't exist. So we're having a conversation where it has been proven that what we're talking about doesn't exist. And in order for it to exist, smart people have to come together and actually get paid to make it happen, right? So, but why should we recreate the wheel? Why wouldn't we have folks that are actually engaged inside of it? So I'd like to have you say something, and then Terrence, I'd like for you to take what's being said and from where you're focused on customer-driven conversations, how that would change and transform into student outcome. I know it's on the spot, but okay, so if you could kind of think in terms of quickly how a school board would use your system, and then if you could then pivot in how artificial intelligence can create the student as the center. And I'm Josh, probably going to pivot to you after that. So,
I guess the quick thing that I would say is that what's common for what I guess I feel like I've learned is that it doesn't matter the sector or the problem or the important public policy challenge or what have you. So take the case of education. What feels essential and at the center is building community, like really building deep relational engagement that's going to stick with you and be loyal and show up when you need it to show up, and that's personalized, you know what I mean? And so if we know what the solution needs to accomplish, what the tenets are, we can more quickly get to a place where we make it. That's all I'll say.
So I reference this. I am a middle schooler. I'm in a Title I school. So I'm a middle schooler. I'm in a Title I school, and I'm that profile of the child that wants to be a football player. There's no odds that I'm going to succeed, but if 40% are doing it, we've got 800 jobs. If the customer-centric conversation is how do we engage them into another paradigm through artificial intelligence, because everybody's an individual, relative to, and I'll just say relative to Plato because I love it, just how would AI engage in that conversation?
All right, so it's pretty complex because it's not just neural network, but it's, like Hillary's saying, it's a lot of the data and how you do something with that data and how that data is then enriched in order to get the results that ultimately you want. What we are finding, and we'll speak about government in a moment because we're doing it at the government level too, not here but in Europe, in order to educate. It is the same thing that we keep hearing over and over again. It is all about mass personalization. And if you can personalize your approach, and you can do it systemically through a machine that reasons and talks and speaks and acts like a human, the question is whether or not you can do it then at scale. So you can take that data, you can break it down, you can enrich it, and that you can do it at scale in order to sift through volumes and volumes of information and do it very, very accurately and very quickly. Now, a neural network can do that and is doing it in many different industries today. You're using an example of a middle schooler who wants to be a football player. So I'll give you an analogy. In real life today, what we're seeing at the same odds, right? So earlier I was talking about entertainment. We work a lot on Broadway today, okay? Those are worse odds. 2 in 10 shows actually work. The average price to bring a show to market today to the stage is $22 million, okay? And so you have a mass amount of producers coming to the stage now, 50 people above the line, all giving, $50,000 to $100,000, not knowing if this piece of art is ever going to make it to the stage or ever going to work, ever. And so there's a risk in that in terms of the odds of what works. If we can take data of 127 years and we can sift through that data, and then we can determine whether or not there was an audience for a show that was like it, that appeared at the same time 55 years ago on on what stage, on what type of show, who the ticket buyers were, where they were, what they said about it, and all of that information, and then personalize the approach, we can determine whether or not someone can become a football player, whether they, not what's here in their heart, but certainly what they have the capabilities to actually do when we look at those characteristics. Now, we do it on a government level today in Europe. In a country in Europe, we actually are taking a look at how we can do that same thing. We can find ticket buyers on Broadway and match them to content and do it very quickly at mass scale. But at the same time, we can take opinions of people as it relates to the environment, and we can educate them in the same way by matching valuable content that they care about and putting them together at scale, and we can change their opinions about the environment.
Thank you. We can change their opinions. Yes, go ahead.
What I guess I'd love to hear everybody's thoughts on is, you can have technology that can give you this kind of data, can give you direction, can give you whatever. But what is the plan to make sure that there's an infrastructure that can support the, helping that student get to that outcome? Because you can think entrepreneurially and think of that student as a market of one, but if you don't have an educational infrastructure that can help him be the market of one, that doesn't put him or her into this just factory, system that's batched by year, batched and, works through the school system, batched by, topic and subject, and then spits out somebody on the other end and is given, a grade pretty much just like just like stock, like livestock at the end of, because basically, I don't know if anybody's familiar with Sir Ken Robinson and his kind of ideology around education, but just the idea of that our school systems were originally put together during the Industrial Revolution and were built for just like the factory systems that were the cool thing at that time. Wouldn't it be awesome right now that we are in the age of technology and the age of entrepreneurship across the board? Like, not entrepreneurship just for the sake of starting a business, but entrepreneurship on how it figures into your life and how you think of yourself. Wouldn't it be great to just revamp this Industrial Revolution aged education system into that? But
let's do that revamping. And so Josh, inside that revamping, because what I want to take away with what you just said is we need an education infrastructure, and that that actually might be we might need to build something big that everybody could use. So it might need a shared service kind of conversation. But Josh, you seem to, so don't lose that. That's like critical. Josh, you seem to be able to be this kind of person that can look at applications and see them in a different way. And so we're engaged with a company called Glogster. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Glogster. They have 1.9 million teachers, and so all over the world, and out of Prague. And so we're engaged with talking to them about creating a research lab relative to their users. So would there be, can you see that this system and what Glogster does, they allow students, typically K-12 students, mainly elementary, to engage and develop something with voice audio in something. But the big thing about them is they're safe. Every school district's user, they're inside. The kids got a user, the parents, so that they've already made that difficult connection of getting to the child, okay? If you were there with Prague, and if you were in Prague talking to the folks in Glogster, representing the United States of America, totally funded, could you see that there would be, what would be the precepts that you would be thinking about in looking at their technology? And do you perceive that, now this is a person conversation, and I'm sure that there's other folks, but can you see this conversation of influencer and education and student and learning being part of this thing that we do relative to education in the future?
So the simple answer is yes. The more complex answer is that one of the problems with introducing new technology is that it doesn't solve a fundamental point, which is it actually helping people create rather than consume, right? So if people have VR glasses on, right, all they're doing is consuming rather than creating something that's actually going to affect and change the world. Now, funny story, when I moved to San Francisco, this was a while back ago, I went to a bunch of conferences there, and I noticed that the people that were speaking were like the head of growth for Uber, and it was just a whole group of young entrepreneurs trying to figure out how to get their first 10 customers.
Right.
And of course, the head of growth for Uber is not going to help them get their first 10 customers. He's, it's a $1 billion plus company, right? And when I saw that, I saw an opportunity to actually help people create. So I saw a problem with consumption, right? And when you see something,
What did you just say?
I saw, basically, I saw an opportunity to help people create.
Yes.
Because they're consuming knowledge that wasn't helpful for them. Right. Granted, it would be helpful once their company maybe was making $10 million in revenue, but at the time, it just made no sense. So that's why when I created a community to help educate people, it flourished really well because it was meant for early entrepreneurs, and I just noticed that problem. And similar to, all these young kids and trying to help them, you have to focus on like, hey, are we focused on something that's vanity driven and just getting them to consume more and introducing technology thinking that that's actually going to help them when they can't even figure out how to put up a good Facebook status, right? And document their life and say, look at what I'm creating. They don't even know how to do that yet. Why would VR technology or anything really advanced help them out? It's only gonna make it worse for them, right? It's not actually gonna make it better. You actually have to make them self-aware before they actually use the technology. And because the self-awareness is the key to everything, right? The technology is gonna take that and take it as far as you can go for it, right? Once they're self-aware, they'll start creating, and ideally, they'll have this mindset, 80% creation, 20% consumption.
Oh, sorry, you had a thing? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, just like Hillary, I have a little one, and I think a lot about the future, which nobody can predict. Yeah. Technology is so emerging at such a crazy exponential rate. It is going to impact every child today in a future that you cannot envision, the jobs you cannot think about or imagine, right? One of the things is how you can augment the innovations of technology as well as the skills that Hillary mentioned for leadership. That no technology is going to provide the leadership. I think it of as 3 C's. Apart from 3 R's that you traditionally learn, the 3 C's that we see in leadership and we need more in future is communication, which is presenting their thought. How do you put a good Facebook update about something they're creating? That they should be very good at, and it should be taught in schools, not coming after 30 years and want to head an organization. And the second thing is collaboration. And in the business world, we know it as the sleazy term networking. But like we see about leadership, and she has seen from the Nation Builder, statistically, what is making a good leader? The one who are able to connect with other humans, right? Collaboration. And the third thing is continuous learning. Yes, today with all the AI data, we can personalize and tell them, today these are the courses you need to do. But these will get outdated in no time. So how do you inculcate that continuous learning within them? And how do you use technology to augment that? Getting all the data and predicting these are the 10, 20 skills that you need to focus on, and use that data to augment with the human skills.
Yeah, I mean, just to quickly add, I guess we're in agreement on this, but the way that we talk about it is often that there's like a leader mindset, right? This, what you said earlier really hit me, because the things that, I guess it's about sorting out what we think technology is really good at and what is inherently human, and assigning those things appropriately, because the truth is that today, if you want to start a business or you want to start a nonprofit or run for office or something like that, it's more accessible. Like there's tech that can help you do that. Cool. And there's data to help you be more effective at it, to target more effectively, to more effectively raise money, like all the things. But what we've noticed is also that, I guess the barrier for us is that if we want everyone to be able to lead, you have to go a step beyond that. You have to go to the place where people are deciding whether or not there's something that they want to create, you know what I mean? And inspire folks to feel like it's possible for them to create things, to like throw their hat in the ring. There's something about this leader mindset, and I think it does relate to the education system in part, because if you feel like it's possible for you to pull this off, that that you can be in this creative space, tech can leverage that, but not necessarily come up with the idea to solve the global challenge in the first place, So there's something about firing folks up to just make something, to create
To solve problems.
to solve
To
problems.
solve problems,
And then leveraging the hell out of any kind of technology, out of all the data, you know what I mean? Like doing
help
it more
de-risk
effectively.
that
than
process.
doing it more effectively than you could have ever done at any other point in history,
Yep.
But how do you, get to the first mover, get folks to be in that space? And that feels like the real nut to crack, so to speak. And it's exciting that we're having that conversation.
So let's close off.
sorry, can I-
I'm going to actually ask you a question.
I can pivot
And
back
I think
here.
I kind of want you to close us off.
That's right.
So I want to speak to Terrence and then say what you're going to say, but plus answer this question, which is, if we built something, could you stay in the conversation to see if other countries would want to use it? So what you're saying plus that. Terrence, I wanted to, because I was very impressed with this Netflix conversation, right? This black is the new orange, or orange is the new black, whatever it was. And that there was a metric-centric conversation relative to folks like that, but did they like that? And so I wanted to kind of look at, have you heard of the state longitudinal data system?
No.
So the state longitudinal data system is a $500 million worth of data warehouse that was built during the Obama administration, and every state has it. It's actually connecting all of the different data relative to workforce into one de-identified data set. And that we're having conversations relative to, could we measure growth and productivity of outcomes, of programmatic outcomes of federal dollars and other dollars that go in, because outcome is the new key in ESG, environmental, government, and social, for corporate funding. The question is, and then we'll end, I believe we're about done, end with that, is if you had that data set, if you had access to that data set, right, individual performance relative to whether or not they're on welfare, whether or not they, what job they have, what education they have, what their grades were in schools, that as a key indicator, as a predictor analysis, could that be used as a background data set to start looking at how it is from an evidence-based education system, what works and what doesn't work, and how would AI be able to then have that layered into looking at student as a user?
There's absolutely no doubt that AI can do it. The question is, what are you trying to really do, and will that data actually tell you it? One of the problems that we have in enterprise AI, because you're speaking of enterprise AI, right, is there is so many flaws in it right now that we need to resolve some of those flaws before I could really answer the question.
Right.
The fact of the matter is there is not a good knowledge base for algorithms, for the tooling that's required to enrich this data in order to get to the answer of your question. I think when you look at that data set that you're talking about, you would find that there is no way to break that down today. There may be in 6 months from now, okay, or to a certain degree it may be. But if I go back to, again, dumbing that down just for a minute to the Broadway example, I can match a ticket buyer to a particular show like, okay? Right. If I can do that, then I can match a particular constituent that's located in a particular geographic, at a particular age, that's a particular gender, that has a particular set of opinions. The answer is, yeah, I can do that. The bigger thing to realize is I can do that in about less than a second. So if you wanted to know, for instance, everyone on the internet in the history of Twitter that ever liked the show Lion King and what they said about it and what the sentiment about what they said on Twitter was, I could tell you in less than half a second. If that's true, then it should also be true that I can break down that data set. What people fear, though, is that by giving them the tools to be able to eventually do that, is that going to change things for the worse or things for the better? And I think that no one has a crystal ball, and we're going to find out because it's going to happen. We're going to find out what it's like to get into a driverless car. You know, and I'll just close by saying I went to CES this year, and it was not the CES that I realize and recognize over the past 24 years. It was a car show. And the opinions of everyone from Intel to GE to every major car manufacturer was there. And their opinion was, I'm going to change your life in the next 6 months. You live in New York City, it costs you $650 to park a car. No more. I'm going to change the parking industry in the next 6 months because your car is going to be parked in New Jersey. And at 6:30 in the morning, you're going to tell your car to come get you in New York City, and it's going to come get you. And your life just changed, and everyone in between just changed. Traffic patterns changed. Everything changed. If we can do that, then we can do what you're suggesting.
Well, I want to have you bring it home, and I'm also wanting to kind of have you hear that if we were able, even this group got together, and if the Department of Education asked you to come together, would everybody agree to come together if they asked you?
Sure.
Sure. Okay. Thanks. So, if there was a meeting to be convened relative to this specific conversation, I'm wondering, would the international community be interested in the results, and would they participate, plus what you were going to say?
Okay. So thank you. So I'll try and wrap and pivot. And the other reason I wanted to be here, because these pens are really good, so I'm going to take one of those on the way. So the first thing I wanted to say earlier was I think we agree with the rest of the panel is that so AI is a wonderful tool, but it's based on the data, which is lag data, not lead data. And we just had a conversation about we don't know what's going to happen in the future. So that's going to bring me to the other point is in doing some of these broader conversations on the education system, just because we have the technology doesn't mean we should use it, and it doesn't mean it's applicable to education. Now, I'm not saying that because I'm government, we want to regulate everything, because that's not the case, but it is, you know, when you're first looking at how we solve problems, this is what is the, it comes back to the thing, what do we want to achieve, and then what's the best way to do it, rather than saying I have a tool and let's bolt it onto something, because that can lead us down, you know, the wrong path. So with the AI part, I think where we'll be going is the augmentation question. How do students use it? How do they use it to create? And how do we, I know there's a broader conversation about making people not scared about AI and all the other technologies, because there is a foreboding in the community about losing jobs, et cetera. So I think that's the broad story, and there's a lot of challenges around that. So that's what I wanted to say earlier. Now, bringing it back to the international community, I do want to sort of draw on, so there is a lot of interest in this area. So the OECD, which is the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, involves a whole lot of countries, and they're looking at the future of work, gender diversity, inequity in education, and the role of technology. And actually, the term about having technology, but whether you should use it is one of the things actually some of the research is showing. It's to say, you need to be careful about where we go and what do we want to achieve for the students. I also want to touch on the earlier point about the infrastructure part, and what's happening at the international level is trying to grapple with this. Okay, so we want to go to student-centric learning, but we've got a system that is based on the industrial age, and so what I know the OECD is working through, well, what does the next phase look like? But that's a very big change for the education system as we sort of move in that direction, because it is a very big mind shift, and it's a challenge, because it could have the potential to change a lot of things. But I know there is a lot of conversations around these horizontal skills, so that's where it's going, because that's how we can try and move towards where we need to go. But back to that question, is the international community interested? Yes, because there's a lot of work going on, whether it's in the OECD, whether it's in other groups such as APEC, G20, etc. A lot of these conversations are happening. I think it's something every government is having an honest think about where we go. We don't have the solutions, and I think part of the solution is actually bringing people together so we can actually get the heterogeneous thinking about where we want to go, so we can challenge the thinking and try and work out what the platform is, and then the government decision makers can work out which way they can where we can go.
I so appreciate that. One last question on top of that. Do you believe that if, in fact, these systems can be built and countries can build these systems, Is there a first mover benefit in that? So, we're in the United States right now. If the United States actually opted to pay for that kind of infrastructure from defense funding and multiple things, would there be a goodwill attached to that? And is there a benefit of being the first mover inside of the conversation within that international context?
It's a good question. So the first thing I'll say is that these are all my comments too, and not very, very clear. That's right. So just put that caveat, like in a big bold underneath. So the first mover advantage is an interesting one because I think even if you look at the innovation literature, first mover doesn't necessarily mean you're the one that's going to win. And I think this is what I think we need, rather than it's not necessarily being a competitor. I think we're going to need to come back to collaboration and learn from each other about what works. And the other thing is being mindful is I'm never going to be presumptuous to say what works in our country is going to work in another country because we're so heterogeneous in how we do things. There's cultural issues we need to adapt. So, and I think this is the beauty of having these broader conversations across boundaries with industry, with government, with communities, with parents, with students, because they're the ones that have to learn.
Exactly.
So we need to have these, and it's an evolving model, and work out what which bits work and are applicable to each particular economy.
I will tell you one thing about that is that what's going on in China right now is extraordinary, because the government has the opinion that they will fund AI all the way through to whatever the result needs to be. And the amount of money that they're throwing at it would be staggering amounts if I was to mention what they are. They are hundreds of billions of dollars on a monthly basis that they're throwing at AI technology for a lot of the things that we just talked about in terms of education and things like that. So if your question is there a first mover advantage? They think so.
They think so.
They think so, and they're going to take a shot at it. They're not where we are right now, but they're getting close. They're getting close.
I think I don't have a timekeeper that I can see, and so I'm trying to desperately get one more question in. And Josh, so I wanted to kind of build this conversation around this distinction between 3 R's, and that there's other kinds of things that we need that are more cognitive and engaging. So, Josh, during your presentation, you spoke about this distinction between coder and this. I wonder if you could, speak a little, because so we can lay down that track along here. So to bring that in, because I think that part of this conversation is saying we should just teach everybody coding and then they understand technology, as opposed to that asset-based conversation you were speaking of.
Yes, it's entirely false idea that you should teach people skills are only going to be relevant for a short period of time. The idea is you have to start with a lot of self-awareness so they can actually build great products and actually understand how to interact with customers, right? That's why so many products fail and so many services fail. It's like they go and build it and they don't even ask a simple question to maybe to 100 potential customers, like, do you even want this? What do you pay for this? Like those simple things, right? And I see that all the time. And it's so funny. A lot of my good friends have really built successful companies, almost all sold their products before it even existed. And I laugh at that because no one else is following that route. And there's a lot of programs out there. There's a lot of entrepreneurs are so focused on, well, this is a new technology. This is new X, right? You don't even need that. So I'll give you an example. So Airbnb, you didn't need a mobile app. You didn't need a whole website for Airbnb. You just needed an email list. You say, hey, if I have friends who want to go over here and rent some houses, apartments, I'm going to go and find a lot of people who are willing to rent out their rooms. And if you want to be on this email list, let me know, right? And all of a sudden you have validated this idea with an email list, right? It didn't take them months and months to do it. It just took one simple email list. And I think that's the part that a lot of people are missing today. So even though coding is great, it's only great if you actually understand how to deal with customers and a lot of the basic psychology that's at the forefront of every single company that gets built.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a thought. Since I work in the same space that you do, startups, and this is the missing part. Yes. They have an awesome AI application, but no revenue, because they didn't start with the problem, right? The same thing goes back to the education. I think we need to take a step back and look at how are we going to change it. So what is the data we need to collect in order to address the problem? right? So I think we need to focus more on what is the challenge and the problem at hand so that we utilize technology to address that challenge, and not because AI is there, use it for the education purposes.
The one challenge that I'll bring to that I have a question about is, I recently published a chart that showed why the majority of startups fail. And
Right.
one of the top reasons is because there's no need for the product.
For the product, exactly.
And ultimately, one person's problem is not another person's problem. And the thing that I find extraordinary about Airbnb, but also Uber, is that, you know, I grew up in New York City, in Manhattan. We've been calling cabs since I was 2. You know, this is not new. Nothing's new. But what Uber was an app. Here comes the app, and all of a sudden, right time, right place. There was never a problem.
To us.
There was never a problem getting a cab in New York City. And so now Uber has been introduced, it worked, and now there's all sorts of problems getting cabs in New York City. You know, so you know, there are a host of different issues that I think are raised, but I really have questions about why startups fail today, and are they the real reasons that we think that they are? But this is interesting stuff.
It is, and the corollary of your story is my story. I landed up in Philadelphia with no driver's license, straight from India, right? And I couldn't get a cab to save my life, literally. So Uber is perfect for me, right?
So stay on this failure conversation just for a moment. So what if we thought of these students as these startups? And that if we looked at how it is that we can engage in failure and success as a metric of how much you made afterwards, as one metric, right? So, and that we actually then design curriculum based on success. Do you think that's an impossible concept for school boards or for the federal government or for state government to conceive of? And would they just say, no, I'll never let that kind of system in?
Well, the metric of success or failure at such a young age is very vague, right? Because the more they fail at that age, they're going to be more successful at a later age. Look at Elon Musk. Some of the stories he says, he grew up in South Africa, and his parents just let him wander the city by himself without any help. So it taught him to get out of difficult situations on his own and things like that. And so many other startups that he was involved in failed a lot. He failed a lot. So I don't know if
if we could look at, like, if you are part of the prison pipeline, or you don't finish school, or you're not able to read and you graduate high school, or not able to construct a sentence. I mean, couldn't we at least be able to say that might be a failure?
Yeah, sure. I was talking about the projects that they undertake. We cannot have a metric for that, but it's about not more about the success or failure rate as much as about, are they prepared, first of all, to handle the future and the type of jobs that is going to pose.
My time is up. And Josh,
are we addressing
Aaron,
their
you
interests?
just did a wrench, and I'm just feeling like we're not going to.
So sorry.
It's okay, we'll keep them guessing for next
Keep
time.
getting for next time. Thank you so much for the time and being able to have this. And as panel, thank you so very much for your engagement in this new idea. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. We're going to go ahead and break for lunch.